Hello and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us, whatever time of day it happens to be, wherever in the world you are. We're delighted to share a little bit of time and information with you this evening. My name is Ginger Fay, and I'm here with Applerouth Education, and we are excited to be able to be part of students' journeys in lots of different ways as they go through their education paths. And tonight we're talking specifically about juniors, soon to be rising seniors, many of them, the class of 2024 on their path to college. I'm joined by two experts tonight who are going to share a lot of information with you in the next hour. Ari Worthman is the Director of College Counseling at Lakeside School in Seattle, Washington. Ari has been on both sides of the desk, as we say, as have I, right, on the admission side of things and on the college counseling side, we call it shipping and receiving. And so he knows the ins and outs of this world and what it's like to go through it as a teenager and a supporter of a teenager. So we're thrilled to have Ari with us and his expertise. Thank you, Ari, for joining us. We're also joined by Dr. Jed Applerouth, who's the founder of Applerouth Education. What a coincidence those two names go together. Jed's background is in EdPsych, and he knows how to make learning sticky and fun and interesting for teenagers, and he's going to share a little bit of the testing side that can be part of the college application process tonight. So thank you so much, Jed, for being with us.
Great to be here.
We're going to go, if we can, talk a little bit about, we're here on the path to college. And some of you have been joining us for the series this month. So we started with the freshmen a couple of weeks ago. We talked with the sophomores last Wednesday, and we're talking with the juniors tonight. If you missed any of these, you can go back and register for them, and you'll receive a copy of the recording, as you will for tonight's program as well. So if you're not able to jot down all of your notes while you might be multitasking during exam week for some and dinner hour for others, feel free to come back and join us for this and any of the other programs that we host. We like to be able to share good ideas and information. At Applerouth, we really believe that when you change a student's self-belief, you can change their life. You can change what's possible for them. If they have the confidence to believe in themselves, then they can execute on the things that they have learned, and they can grow in whatever direction they want to from there. It's an exciting thing to be able to be part of students' journeys, and we're honored to be part of it. We support students in 3 different ways. We work with students on academic tutoring, anywhere from middle elementary school all the way through college. Our tutors love to nerd out on college topics that they studied themselves. We help students with high stakes test prep. So if students are going to apply for secondary school, maybe are taking something like the SSAT or the ICE exam, or if you're in New York, the SHSAT. We certainly work with a lot of students on the SAT and the ACT, and we also help students who are applying to graduate school with the GRE. We also do executive function coaching. So that's helping students put together their skills so that they can accomplish everything they mean to. So if we can be of help to your student, we would be honored to do so. Tonight, we're going to talk about the college journey in particular, and we want to be able to answer your questions. So as they occur to you, feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box, and Ari and Jed will do their best to answer every question and cover every topic before we wrap up in the hour. But before you ask your questions, we're going to ask a few questions of you. So we're going to launch a quick poll just to get a sense of the audience tonight, to know how to direct our comments. Are you a student, a parent, or an educator? Where are you, or is your student in this journey, and can we be of help to you in this process now or in the future? So thank you for taking a second to answer our questions, and then you get to ask all of your own. That's the deal. It's a good trade. So tonight we're really going to talk about what 11th graders need to know and do now as they're sort of facing down the gauntlet of their last summer of high school and rising into senior year. And we're also going to talk about standardized testing options in a test optional landscape, or as I like to call it, a submission optional landscape. The power and control is in the hands of the students, and they can decide whether or not they want that to be a big or any part of their application process. So we're going to kind of try and cover both of those things, and I'm going to let Ari get us started on thinking a little bit about how a student can get ready to begin this journey. And then Jed will jump in and talk a little bit about testing. Ari's going to wrap us up, and then we'll jump in for questions. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, guys. Thanks so much for being part of it.
Awesome. Good evening again, everyone. I'm Ari Worthman, Director of College Counseling at Lakeside School. First, Jed and Ginger, thank you so much for having me this evening. I love talking about the college process. I'm going to try and do it succinctly and in a way that's interesting and engaging for all of you, and also trying to recognize that I imagine if all of you are juniors or junior parents and guardians of juniors, that everyone's probably in a slightly different place right now. Some of you might just begin researching colleges, or maybe you haven't begun. Some of you might be far down the path of researching, maybe even you know where you want to apply. And now you're starting to think about, hey, what do I do with this application? And what are some tips I should keep in mind? So I'm going to try to cover both. And I hope that even if some pieces, particularly the research piece, if you've already been going down that road, I'm hopeful that still that some of the information that I'm going to share will be helpful to you. First and foremost, spring is a great opportunity, and summer, to be researching colleges and trying to figure out where will you apply. Some resources you see on the screen are some of my favorites. So know that you will get a copy of this recording afterward via email, so you can access this in the future. You can certainly, if you want to, take screenshots of what you're seeing right now, but I don't know if I really think that's necessary. One of my favorite resources is the one at the top, College Board Big Future. It is a search engine with so much information where you can identify what are some majors you're considering, what part of the country do you want to be in, what are certain activities that you're interested in having in a college campus, and it pulls up a list of schools for you to begin researching. Sometimes if you're too general, if you only put in 3 or 4 different criteria, you might get a list of like 400 or 500 schools, so you can keep narrowing it down by getting more specific in terms of some of the things that you're interested in. And you can always change that criteria too as you grow and change your mind about what you're looking for in a college. If you're someone who has the opportunity to visit college campuses, that's certainly a great way to get to know college campuses. But another resource too, whether you don't have the time, whether you don't have the resources, or whether you just don't feel like getting in a car or getting on a plane, another resource for sort of visiting college campuses is Campus Real, which is an independent organization that actually solicits college students on campuses across the country to sort of build videos about their lives on the college campuses. So it's a little bit less scripted. It's sort of a cool way to get an inside scoop about what life is like on particular campuses. And it's an inside scoop that hasn't been designed from a marketing perspective by the various colleges that you might be looking at. A lot of my students at Lakeside, and this is a newer thing for me, I'm old, I don't use YouTube, I'm not a big social media person, but a lot of my students rave about a day in the life of, insert the name of a college here. A great way also to experience a college in terms of the residential life, the activities, the social life, the vibe of the campus, independent of colleges' websites and their own marketing materials. And then there are college websites are replete with information and guidebooks as well. And these are some of my favorite guidebooks that you're seeing up here on the screen. So you can use those as a starting point for some researching. For some of you that might be thinking about, hey, cost of college, I'm probably going to need to be applying for financial aid. One of the things you definitely do want to be thinking about is factoring that into how you build your list. So if you're saying, hey, I want to go to, whether it's private college, public university, but that price tag that I'm seeing on the website is going to be a little steep for me and my family. So I'm going to need to get financial aid. So one of the things you do want to do as you're sort of getting to learn more about colleges, and maybe you're starting to narrow your list, is for each school, you want to look at what are my chances of getting financial aid? Is that college likely to give me money? And is it likely to give me the money I need? So how do you do that? Because this is not always information you're going to find on colleges' websites. The Big Future search engine I mentioned earlier, if you go to their website and you type in the name of any particular school, so you're actually seeing a snapshot on the side here of my alma mater, Haverford College, outside of Philadelphia. You type in the name of any school, it's going to bring up a profile of that school, and you're going to see a little tab for cost. And when you open that tab, you'll see a ton of different data points, and you're seeing a sample here on the screen. A few data points to look at to get a sense of, hey, is this a school that I should maybe keep around because I know they might meet my family's need? And it's right under where you see distribution details. So particularly freshmen with need and received financial aid. So in other words, the college reviewed their application, said, hey, we recognize this student needs money in order to go here, and we've provided them with money. So you take a place like Haverford, you can see that figure is 96%. That's a good indicator that if you have financial need, there's a pretty decent likelihood they're going to give you some money. The second piece of that is right under that, which is percent of need met. So that's basically saying, however much money you need, whether that's $5,000 or whether that's the full $75,000 or $80,000, which includes all expenses, what percent of that are they actually meeting? And so in the case of Haverford, it's 100%. So again, if you're someone applying for financial aid, you can look at this data and say, you want to know what? There's a pretty decent chance that I would get money, and then I would get the money that I need. As opposed to, you might see some schools where the number, those numbers are along the lines of 50% and 50%, meaning colleges their budgets are really limited. They might look at some students and say, we know they need money, we can't give them money, or we know they need money, and we know they need $50,000, but we can only give them $25,000, so your need isn't met. So you do want to be sure that at least half, I would say, if not more, of the colleges on your list are colleges that are going to meet you and your family's full financial need. And if you're not familiar with them yet, a good way to just begin to estimate how might colleges evaluate your financial need, what type of money might they give you. All colleges by federal law are required to have something called a net price calculator on their website, where you and your family can go in and just plug in some very basic financial information about your family, and it will give you a general sense of how much money you might be eligible for. A few other resources I just wanted to share. College Greenlight. If you are a student of color and you're trying to figure out, hey, I want to visit some college campuses, especially if visiting college campuses you might be a little bit too pricey for you, College Greenlight highlights it's a database essentially of colleges and universities across the country that have what we call fly-in programs, opportunities for you to apply. And if you're selected, the college will pay for you and maybe 50 or 60 other students from across the country to fly in and spend the weekend there and get to know the school. So definitely take a look at College Greenlight if that's something you're interested in. And there are some other great resources, as you see here on the screen, for first-generation students, meaning students whose parents and guardians, in this case, did not attend college at all. There are two different types of first-gen students who are the first to go to college in the United States and their parents went abroad. This particular resource is geared for students whose parents did not attend college or university at all. And for students who are members of the LGBTQIA+ community, I often resource the Campus Pride Index for all different types of data points, but largely just to get a sense of, hey, is this a friendly place for students who are members of that community? So those are some resources in terms of how to research. And you can use those, I'd say, all the way through now, going throughout the summer, all the way into your senior year. Another thing I would encourage many of you to do is start the application. And this is going to sound a little hokey. I typically find with my students, one of the biggest fears is that the application is hard, it's daunting. They actually think it's a lot more comprehensive than what it is. And when my students actually start a college application and they start just playing around in it and seeing what it entails, they're like, oh, this actually really isn't that bad. It's not very hard. It's often a lot shorter than what they think. Most college applications are just actually plugging in some pretty basic information about yourself. Yes, some of them will have some essays and you'll enter activities, but for the most part, most of it is blank lines. What is your name? What is your address? What is your first language? What language do you speak at home? So a lot of basic things that they're just trying to learn about you to put together a whole picture of who you are, but stuff that you can sort of answer in your sleep. So I find if you're nervous about the application process, creating an account now, particularly in the common application, and that's what you're seeing on the screen, creating an account now is a great way to realize it's actually not that bad. If you're not familiar with the Common Application is an electronic platform that over 1,000 colleges and universities across the country, and even some around the world, accept as their main application. And so it's an opportunity for you to create an account, go in, begin playing around. With most applications, including the Common Application, including the other application platforms I've listed up here on the screen, this is not something where you need to go through and do everything in one sitting. So you create an account, you have a password or username, you can go in and out. So don't feel that you have to sit down and do all of it at once. It really is a great opportunity to go in and explore. If you look at the screenshot that you see here of the Common application, the Common App tab here, if you look on the side, you can see there are about 6 different sections. And you can sort of get a sense from the name of each section what types of questions they're going to ask you about. The very last section, courses and grades, some colleges require and some don't. And if you are applying to a college that requires it, it will make you do it. And if you're not applying to a college that doesn't, they won't make you do it. But a great thing when you get to that section is you do want to have your high school transcript available, because basically that section is you're basically almost entering your entire transcript by hand into the Common application. So if we can go to the next slide. So some basic things that you might want to have at your fingertips. These are some pieces of information that often I find with my students when they might go in and begin the application, they don't have this information on hand. Now, again, that's totally fine because as I said, you can go into the application, save, and come back later. But this is some stuff you just want to have in front of you, especially when you're getting to the point of, hey, a deadline's creeping up and I'm getting closer to submitting this application. One thing I want to just highlight here in particular, where I say name and email of your teacher recommenders. So a component of many college applications, but not all, is getting a recommendation from teachers and sometimes two. And I would encourage you, once you have done your research and you're sort of honing what's going to be on your final list, to spend a little bit of time on each of their admission websites and really maybe even compiling a list of what are the requirements. Do they require teacher recommendations? Do they recommend an interview, or is an interview optional? One of the things I think you can also begin thinking about now is requesting teacher recommenders. Some colleges, I said, require 1, some require 2, and there are some that don't require any. But for those that require them, that is an important piece of the application. As you're selecting the 2 teachers you might ask to write a recommendation on your behalf, just a few things to think about. These are largely academic pieces. So yes, it's always nice if you're asking a teacher that knows you personally and that you have a connection with, but you really want a teacher that can speak to your creativity, your problem-solving skills, your grit, your ability to work with other students, in particular subjects. If you're asking a math recommendation, a math teacher, someone that can really speak to your math prowess and your math ability and how you've grown in that respect. So we typically have a tendency to want to ask people for recommendations who we feel the most connected to, and that can be okay, but you do want to be sure that in this case, this is someone that can really speak strongly to your academic abilities. You definitely want teachers from 2 different disciplines. So when I say disciplines, I do mean core disciplines: English, history and social sciences, math, language, and science. If you have an art teacher, that's often great. You can sometimes send that as an additional recommendation, but there are many colleges when they say teacher recommendations, they want it from those a teacher from one of those 5 core areas. And the only thing I would recommend is have it from 2 different core areas. Most colleges do not specify that they want one from STEM and one from non-STEM. I can think of 3 schools that actually have specific requirements about who the recommendations come from, and those are Caltech, MIT, and Harvey Mudd, that say you need to have 1 STEM teacher recommendation and 1 non-STEM teacher recommendation. But outside of that, colleges literally say we require 1 or 2, and you choose. So you should definitely choose the teachers that you feel write the strongest. I would check in with your high school and your guidance office or your college counseling office to see if they have specific procedures or recommendations on when and how to ask teachers if you haven't done that already. And if they don't, I always say the sooner you ask the teacher, the better. It just gives them a head start in beginning to write that letter and write a really thorough letter for you. Another important piece of the application, if it's applicable to you, is your SAT, ACT, and AP scores. AP scores are always optional in the application. If you've taken AP scores or IB tests and you have really good scores, you can report them. And if those aren't good scores, you simply don't report them. But the section on the SAT and ACT basically asks, are you reporting scores? And if so, what are those scores? And so I'm going to turn it over to Jed now to talk a little bit about testing. What are some testing strategies, how you decide whether or not to report scores? Jed.
Thank you, Ari. Yeah, so today I have a brief, in about 10 minutes or so, talk on testing. And it's relevant. Many of you in the audience, some of you have taken your test, some of you are finished, some of you are planning on doing it this summer or the fall. And then definitely the question in about 5 months is, do I send the scores? And I intend to talk about that, the nuance of that as well. So to begin, testing. First, 2 parts. We have the SAT in its current form and the ACT. It's changing in a little while, but that's not going to affect you all. That'll affect only the class behind you. SAT, those of you who haven't finished your testing, it has more advanced, higher level of reading and critical thinking. So it's about 2-3 grade levels higher in the reading level than the ACT. ACT, you have a standalone separate science section, which requires some outside knowledge of science, and you have more rigorous, more advanced math. So those are the key distinctions: harder reading, harder math, and more science. The overlap is currently about 80%. So whenever you're prepping for one, you are de facto prepping for the other one as well. A lot of overlap in grammar and in reading skills, reading graphs, a lot of algebra and so forth. So no matter what, you're prepping for both the tests at once. One key difference is the timing element, which is going to even get more exacerbated in the next iteration of the digital SAT, where the ACT is a much speedier test. It's about speed and pacing. You have essentially a 40% more time per question when it comes to the SAT. It's a more spacious test. You can go a little slower. On the ACT, it's about speed. You have to go quicker, and that's just the nature of the 2 tests, which will change even more next year. All right, so the question is, which one do I do first? We recommend always getting a dual baseline, getting a practice test in for the SAT or a PSAT, and getting a practice test in for the ACT. And you compare them, and you find out, am I better on one or the other? If I'm more than 60 points on the scale of the SAT, then go with that test. So if I have a 1270 on the SAT, and I have a 24 on the ACT, go with the SAT. However, there's a certain range where you're close. If I have a 1200 SAT and 26, that's the margin of error. Then you say which one felt more natural, more comfortable, and go with that one. That's how you tell. But baseline testing is really essential. Ideally, take the test 3 times is our ideal, except for kids who just crush it in 1 or 2 and they're done. But you have your target score. I'm going for this. The score makes me competitive at the schools on my list. But our research over tens of thousands of students shows that most kids are going to see gains through 3 tests. But we definitely have plenty of kids who are 1 and done, who do plenty of practice tests. Some are 2 and done. But we see big gains between test 1 and test 2, and smaller from 2 to 3. But after 3, most kids peak. So that's our, if you had 2 already, maybe 1 this summer, maybe 1 in the early fall before you apply. They're out there. Things that make a difference and help kids score higher. Practice tests. They're essential. They're important. And kids who do more practice tests get higher final scores. Having your sessions spread out over time. Kids who cram it in a week or 2 don't do as well as those who have it over 10 weeks, 11 weeks. When you put more time in, you tend to do better. And having momentum towards the end, it's important. Before every official SAT or ACT, you do a practice test within the month prior, and then have a goal. Not just I want to do better, but am I going for a 33, or am I going for a 27, or am I going for a 1320? Whatever your score is, know what you're shooting for, and have that help you calibrate with your practice how you're doing and are you tracking. Timelines. You have 7 ACTs, STs every single year. We are currently about to hit June, so we have a June, a July, September, and October, and December ACT. So there are 5 left before your apps are due. For the SAT, we have one coming up in June, August, October, November, December, also 5 more left. So those of you who need one more test, you got time, and that's possible. Super scoring is very common, where schools take your best section from like the March math and the verbal from June and combine them, and that's the only score they talk about when they're looking at your application. That's called super scoring. Many schools do it. You can go on the College Board app, the Big Futures, and figure out do your school super score. Many of them will. All right, and as we mentioned, the world is test optional for the most part, and we're probably never going back to the world of the majority of schools being test required. That's a previous time. COVID changed the whole universe in that regard. So the question is now, you have a test score. Do I send it? That is the question. Now, test scores still are meaningful for some schools. And there are, if you're in California, there's a number of, the UCs and Cal State schools are blind. And there are about, 30, 40 other schools in the country that are test blind. But of the 2,500 roughly, 4-year schools, only 83 are test blind. So that's like 3%. So 97% are going to be test optional, or the handful are test required. So part of it is testing. There's been a lot of grade inflation over the past 30 years. If you haven't noticed, A's are given out more easily than they were when I was a student, and Ginger and Ari. Things have changed in terms of grading cultures, parental influence and pressure, and the understanding of just game theory that, hey, when our kids have better grades, they have better outcomes. So everyone, it's kind of part and parcel of what's happened in the US and other places. So we know that there's been research showing that test scores are actually pretty good predictors compared to high school GPA of both grades and in college, and also graduation rates. So test scores are helpful for that. And also when comparing a very broad, diverse applicant pool, test scores can be useful. I'm looking at 40,000 applications for especially big state schools. Having a test score can make it more efficient of getting from this big pile down to a smaller number. Also, they can help you differentiate yourself. Having strong leadership can be differentiator. Having a bunch of amazing academic rigor, having strong test scores, it's a factor that can make you stand out in the pool. There are a number of schools. If you're looking at Florida, tests are required for the state schools. Looking at Georgia, looking at UGA and Tech, which are very strong schools, required. Tennessee. Now there are a few others. There's Purdue, Georgetown, MIT. There's a small handful, the military academies, but we think over time we're going to see more state schools jumping on. We saw UNC, Chapel Hill teased it, and Texas teased it. UVA, there are certain schools, but part of it that shouldn't affect your class, maybe your younger siblings. But also, there's a lot happening this summer. They're going to announce a big thing in the Supreme Court about affirmative action, which may change this whole calculus. So some schools like Auburn are conditional optional, that if I have a 3.6 or above, it's optional. 3.59 or below, test required. And they're very clear. We encourage test scores, but if you're over 3.6, they are optional. So we're seeing more of this happening with this component. Now, test scores can affect merit-based aid. And that's something that we see on a regular basis. My niece applied to Alabama. She lives in Virginia, and she had 1390 on the SAT. They offered her the UA scholarship, which turned tuition from $30,000 a year from Virginia to under $6,000. It's $6,000 a year. So a net savings of $96,000, which was meaningful. And so test scores in her case could be helpful, beneficial. There are other schools that offer merit-based scholarships that look at your academic grades, you look at your rigor, and look at your testing. So that is a thing. So now the question is, do I send my scores? Now, weak scores, you don't send. If they're not going to be competitive, if you're under profile for a school, keep those to yourself. But strong scores, there are a few exceptions. We talked about this before. Like if you're from a region that's really underrepresented, there are certain cases where even if you're looking at a very strong school and their mid-50 range, let's say, is a 1450 to 1530, but you're applying from a small corner of West Virginia where the average test score in your school is like an 1100 and you have a 1380. So you're still under profile, but you're very strong for that region, and they're going to bring in students from West Virginia. So there are certain cases, but typically, you want to be close to profile or on profile for the school to send your scores. The scores should send, show strength. I'm strong at testing for your class, but also you have to be very thoughtful that 1390 shows strength at this school, but I would never send that score, to Penn or to Yale. Or there's certain, if this helps me here, this hurts me here, the exact same score. And so you have to use strategy and look closely at their mid-50 range. Am I in that range, or am I well below? And don't send to schools where you're well below in most cases. All right, so there's a question out there of how much do the scores matter? And we're still waiting. There's an annual survey of schools saying, what factors for admission are the most important? And grades, core grades, academic rigor are always first. Testing was right behind them. But right now we're looking at data from 2019 before the pandemic. Hopefully this summer we'll get new data and find out really how important our test scores perceived by colleges. We'll learn more soon. But there are schools we're getting kind of tease it out, like BC up in Boston. They clearly seem to like test scores. Looking at their pool of number of kids who applied with test scores, 17,000. Without test scores, 22,000. How many kids got in from that smaller pool with test scores? 5,000. Without test scores, 2,500. So the admit rate was about 30% with test scores, about 10% without test scores. That's profound. They're communicating clearly that test scores from BC are meaningful. There is something here to throw out, though. There is an issue of correlation, because kids who send test scores tend to have higher test scores. Kids with higher test scores tend to have higher grades. So some element here is something called collinearity in stats and correlation. However, there still is something, causation, where you have two kids applying from the exact same high school, similar course taking, very similar grades. One sends a 34 ACT, one has no testing. That 34 is part of the conversation. It becomes part of how we look at the applicant. And so even in that, where there is some element where the tests can be causal, but no one has given us that data of how much is causal, how much is correlational. That's just up to us to guess. Here's some other stats. UVA, this actually data is older. UVA is actually more than double now, the rate of kids getting with test scores. Notre Dame, about double. BC, even higher. But some schools don't have that same huge pop. Like Fordham or Tufts is about half, Barnard about half, Wellesley, Emory's almost double. So it's Colgate. So certain schools, like Vandy's only 20% of a pop. So certain schools seem to put more on the tests. That's how it seems from the outside. All right, so the question is, do I send in my scores? Are they going to strengthen? First, get your baseline or get your testing in, figure out, am I close? For some kids, even prepping is not going to make sense. I'm looking at a range of schools. I have outstanding rigor. I have great grades. Everything is set up. Looking at this top tier of schools, my testing, my baseline, I'm at a 20 on the ACT. And that's too big of a gap. I wouldn't put any resources towards that. However, if I'm looking at schools where the average score, they want like a 29 or 30, I do my baseline, I have a 26. Okay, you're in the range where your score could be an asset in application. That's where putting in energy, effort, resources could make some sense for you. And then the question is, do you want the school to see your test scores? Are they going to strengthen? Are they going to make your profile more compelling and competitive? Treat every school differently. Look very closely at that middle 50 range. And if your tests are over half, then you send them. Top quartile, always send them. In terms of even over the halfway point, typically send them. If you're in the bottom quarter of students, most folks recommend we talk to withhold those, and below the below that, so however, in the third quartile, we're in the lower half, there's kind of a question is how strong are your grades and your academic rigor. If they're outstanding and your testing is only moderate, I probably lean totally into on your grades and rigor. But however, if my grades are good but not great, my testing is decent, I would put the testing into the mix. So you're always looking closely at that middle range, at your grades and at the test scores, and seeing, will they strengthen? And that is my piece. Ari, my man, it's back to you.
Thanks, Jed. As you can tell, Jed is a wealth of information. One of the reasons I was so excited when Jed and Ginger invited me to be on this panel is for years now, I met Jed in 2010. Jed is probably the standardized testing expert who I read every single thing that comes out from Jed, because it's very well thought out and very knowledgeable. So, and you certainly saw that this evening. As we just go back to sort of finishing up the application, so testing is one component of it. And as you saw from Jed, there's a lot of thinking you need to do behind the testing piece. And in the end, you do all this thinking, and then it's a quick little line you enter into the application. It's one section, but it can be a significant line. So definitely that was a lot that Jed gave you. And I think it's always worth it to go back maybe even later when you get the copy of this to just revisit some of that information. Some two final things about the application before we open it up to Q&A. In the application, you're going to be asked, or in many applications, not all, in many, you're going to be asked about your extracurricular activities. So what you're seeing here on the slide is I've given you a glimpse of, in the common application, which I was showing you before, where you can enter up to 10 different activities. What types of information are they going to ask you about your activities? And you sort of see the screenshot here, and a few things I want to highlight. Number one, note the character counts. And these are not word counts. These are character counts. So when you're entering your activities, they're not looking for vivid, long descriptions of each activity. Activities really just are a snapshot of what are your interests and how do you spend time outside of the classroom. So a mistake I see students making sometimes is stressing over, and on this line where it says maximum characters 150, please describe this activity. I often see students stressing over how can they cram as much information into that space as possible. often they're trying to cram awards or recognitions they've gotten in there. And the honest truth from my experience is colleges don't care. They really want to know just what is the activity, what do you enjoy, and that space in particular. What I heard Jessica Marinaccio, who's the Dean of Admission at Columbia, recently say when she spoke at my school, she said when she looks at the activities, really she's looking at those additional lines mainly to understand what the activity is, whether you have awards or anything else. That's not really important to her, because again, you might go to a high school where you're a member of a club, and that club is named something like Gorillas for video games, and that might make a lot of sense to you, and that is going to make no sense whatsoever to Columbia or any other college or university. So that space is really to give them a sense of what is this activity that you're a part of. So you do want to make sure, for that reason, no acronyms. The clubs and different organizations often have acronyms. Those acronyms will be known only to you. So definitely spell out the names of the organizations that you're a part of. Definitely clarify if it's not a self-explanatory name. We can rest assured that colleges know what soccer means, what any sport is. You don't need to explain what baseball is. You don't need to explain what the Gay Straight Alliance is or what the Black Student Union is. But when you have things that are clearly not self-evident, you want to spell that out a little bit. What you're not seeing here, which is the only little part that cut out, at the very bottom, you can see there's a question where it's going to ask you for approximate hours per week and weeks per year. And I can tell you, this stresses my students out so much, and you do not need to be stressed. It is an estimate. They are looking to get a sense of, hey, do you spend 2 to 5 hours a week on doing this activity, or do you spend 15 to 20? Again, estimate. Whether you say 2 and it's really 3 because you somehow miscalculated, no one's going to care. So don't get too stressed over this section. Also know that this section is where you list everyone has different lives and different commitments. There are many people that are not engaged in tons of activities because they have family commitments at home, watching younger siblings as their parents work. Activities can include a job as well, whether it's a job you do because you just want to earn money for yourself or you're helping support your family. So really, when I say activity, is that is anything you do, anything to which you contribute a significant amount of time that outside the classroom. So as you're filling this out, no, it's just a snapshot of what you do outside the classroom. It is not a resume in the sense where you need to tell them, I play soccer for 4 years, and then you're like, I scored 30 goals and had 25 assists and won the MVP award. And then I was first team all county and second team all state. You can list it, but it's not really going to be that impactful. And then last but never least, the part of the application that probably gives the students the most amount of angst is the college essay, if a college requires it. Not all colleges require college essays. So one thing you definitely want to do as you're narrowing down your list of colleges, as I said before, is spend some time looking over their application instructions on the website and see, do they require essays? And if so, which ones? So the Common App which if they're on the Common App, they might not require an essay, but if they do require it, the Common App actually gives you 7 different prompts from which to choose. Prompt number 7 is topic of your choice. So you can really write the essay on anything. The other prompts you're seeing there are really designed to just give you a sense of what you could write about. If you're just starting from scratch, you're like, what do they want? But you really can write about anything. So a few things just to keep in mind about writing the college essay if it's required. First, this is not your autobiography. That is really key. I see students stressing all the time about, I couldn't fit all these other things into my application, so how am I going to fit it into your essay? You're not. What you really want to do is think about, hey, what is something about me, whether it's an interest you have, an experience you've had, something about you that was meaningful, that is a slice of you that you want to tell the college about, that you think reflects an important part of your personality or your values or your lived experiences. I think a really good way to approach this is tell it as a story, right? And the reason I say tell it as a story is, think about it this way. When you tell a story, everyone tells a story in a very distinct voice. So even imagine this. So there are a bunch of us on this webinar this evening. If I said to each one of you, go tell a story to your friends this evening about the webinar, that story is going to sound really different in the way each one of you tells it. So it's a really good way for a college to get to hear your own personality, because it's your voice, it's the way you approach things, it's the way you see the world. So tell a story and make sure you're finding space in that essay to explain the meaning of the story. That is in many cases the most important piece. We're not talking about a long essay. The Common Application essay is maxed out at 650 words. Yes, the field stops accepting letters when you get words when you get to 650. 650 is about 1 page single space. So it's not long. This is not an opportunity to brag, and it's not an opportunity to repeat other things that are in your application. It's an opportunity to add and to use your voice and to share some interesting things about you. As you can see here, I have a warning to parents and guardians who might be on this call. A very common mistake that parents and guardians make, and it's always well-intentioned, but it can have some not great consequences for students in the essay process, is they see their student's essay and they're like, this doesn't sound like the essay I would see at my law firm or in my doctor's office. And we need to up the vocabulary here, and we need to make it sound more sophisticated. And what ends up happening is the student's voice gets completely lost. And we have an essay that doesn't sound anything like the student. And yes, believe it or not, college admission officers can tell when essentially the essay ended up being written by someone in their 40s, 50s, or 60s versus someone who wrote this essay who's 16, 17, 18, or 19 years old. And so what we're looking for, and I think what colleges are looking for, is not an essay that sounds like, wow, this person is a well-educated lawyer or doctor and they're amazing. They're looking for a really good essay written by a 16, 17, 18, or 19-year-old. So please make sure, I think parents and guardians, you can be great at being sounding boards. If your student wants to share their essay with you, about giving them some very general feedback on how maybe they can tell the story more effectively. But I really encourage you to refrain from getting into the weeds of, hey, let's rewrite all these sentences and use bigger words and sound more sophisticated, because that usually backfires on the student. And lastly, a very common question I get all the time is, what do good college essays look like? The frustrating thing that's hard is there's no recipe, but these are 2 different resources. If you wanted to view a sampling of different college essays, Johns Hopkins and Connecticut College actually every year publish some of their favorite essays. What I love about it is you're going to see how different they are. And what you're also going to see is that a lot of essays don't focus on big things. They don't focus on the big game you won, or when you won that big prize, or you got straight A's on your transcript, whatever it is. They're often focusing on smaller, more meaningful moments in students' lives. Some of the best essays I've seen have to do with jobs students have had. I had a young woman a couple of years ago write the most phenomenal essay that our Harvard representative said it was the best essay she'd seen that year, about her job working at the movie theater at the concession stand, and all the people she had to interact with who would show up to their movie late and be yelling at her to hurry up and get them their popcorn. And she was very funny about it. She was like, as if it's my fault that they showed up at the movie 10 minutes late. Now I have to hurry up. Another great essay a couple of years ago came from a young man who wrote about his pencil collection. Yes, he actually is obsessed with number 2 pencils, but they actually have deep meaning to him. And so he wrote about that. So sometimes I hope what you get to see if you do read through some of these sample essays is that some things that you might think are not important to them, but are very important to you, actually are important to them. So as you look through these essays, I hope you get that sense. And also, don't be intimidated by them, right? Good writing, you go through a couple different drafts sometimes. You shouldn't be looking at these essays and saying, okay, I need to write an essay just like that. I hope it gives you a sense of the variety, and also in terms of writing style. Hey, I like that type of style. Maybe I'll try and appropriate some of that for my essay, or I like that technique they use there. Maybe I'll think about using that in my essay too. So just to really jog your memory and give you some ideas.
Oh, that's great. All right, Ginger.
Thanks, Ari. Thank you, Jed. Lots of good tips and good advice and suggestions. We've got questions coming in from the audience, and we're going to do our best to cover all the topics. There was a quick just clarifying question, Ari. You just mentioned a great essay about a student's job. Is a job an extracurricular activity? Is that the right place to list it or talk about it in your application?
Absolutely. And I will just say very quickly that JT Duck, who is the Dean of Admission at Tufts University, I heard him say a couple of years ago that he thinks that jobs are not only highly valuable, but he feels like that students and families don't value them enough. I'm not saying you should all go out and get a job, but if that's something you're doing and something you like, no, it's actually very valuable and something you should absolutely be listing in your application.
When I was reading at Emory, it's one of John Ladding's favorite things, is students working, having the lessons of a job, and then telling those lessons in their college essays. We've got someone asking a little bit about testing and college classes, right? So if standardized testing at its best is meant to predict a little bit how a student's going to do in college, if they're already taking classes at a local community college, do they still need to do standardized testing? How would those things be evaluated together independently in the student's application?
I mean, we could both take a stab at this one, Ari. My sense of it is I would lump the college classes in the same as their AP classes or IB classes. They're advanced classes. It shows readiness for college. But in terms of the strength of the SAT, there's a level of standardization across a very large national pool. That's part of the utility of that test. And college, again, grading cultures are different. At the NV Community College, in terms of how they grade, what they grade, that won't tell the school the exact same thing as they got a 35 on the ACT. So my sense is, for sure, advanced classes, performance, like, sending 4s and 5s on APs shows a level of proficiency and ability. They're great for placement also. But in terms of giving them the information you get from a standardized test, I think these are distinct pieces in my experience of it.
Yep. I will just echo what you said, Jed. I actually don't have anything to add. I think that was well said, and you hit the nail on the head.
Thank you both. The dreaded round letter. A student is getting a C instead of a pointy letter, which is everyone's favorite. If you get a dreaded round letter, which is a perfectly fine grade, my mom told me, but she didn't really mean it. If you get a round letter, if you get a lower grade, whatever letter or number it is, in a subject that is not the subject you're planning to study in college, is it undoing those possibilities? This student in particular is hoping to go to a direct admit program for pre-med students, but I think it's a broader question, is really sort of, if I've got that icky grade, what do I do about it? And it's really just to say, because I do want to say, like, there are lots of students who work hard and that's the grade that they earned and they should feel proud of it. But if it's a grade that's different than all your other grades, if it's lower than all your other grades, how do you address that in your application, and what impact might it have?
I'll take that one. I would say, the hard part about the college process is every college does things slightly differently. So there's no one universal answer. But what I would say, generally speaking, from my experience, yes, they are going to look at all your grades. So they are going to see that C. For pre-med in particular, though, that will not be the kiss of death. The emphasis for pre-med, the most important grades will probably be your math grades, and also making sure that you've had exposure to some chemistry, physics, and biology. So that would probably be the most important things for things like pre-med. So I don't think you should worry that a C in computer science is now, if you say in your application, I want to be a pre-med student, the C in computer science is going to knock you out of contention. But I do think it's always a smart thing. I think the author of that question, I think, is asking a good question, is the application itself tells an entire story about you, right? And you want that story to come together and line up. So on the flip side, let's pretend the author of that question was saying, okay, I had a C in my math classes and I'm applying for pre-med. Okay, that could definitely be a much harder situation, because now the story isn't lining up, right? There's an expectation that, as a pre-med student, you're going to be taking some calculus and you're going to be doing some other things with math. I'm not saying you shouldn't be pre-med, but you should just know that in that case, that could make it a little bit harder for you. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ari. Jed, this one's for you. We had heard that all the colleges were test optional, and then our daughter decided to apply to Georgetown, and it's not. So we haven't done any test prep, and she hasn't taken any tests, and it's the end of her junior year. Is it too late? What could we do?
Too late? No. We have 5 tests left before apps are in. Even unless you're going to be applying early to Georgetown, then you have like 3 tests left. And so the name of the game is you want to sign up probably for the August SAT or the July ACT. We're still in the window for that now. And so if you're looking at, again, like Purdue announced, like suddenly tests are now required, and that can happen. That could happen this summer, where schools have been contemplating, they just announce it. And so you can definitely have time to prep, ideally 6, 8 weeks in advance. But even so, part of a testing plan, it could be the August test, then October, and then that should be okay for early deadlines. So yeah, it's not too late. The window's still open.
Thank you. I feel like I know the student who submitted this question. My mom wants me to do a summer program at a college. My dad says I have to do an internship, and I just want to go back to camp and be a counselor. What's the best way to spend the last summer of high school?
Go to camp. And the reason I say that is I have, from my experience, I actually think students and families often think that that summer is a much more important part of the application process than it is. So think about it this way. So if you go back, if you can think back a few minutes to when I was showing you the activities section of the application, most colleges don't even ask what you did with your summer. I can think of 2 that do, that have in their own specific questions. Stanford and Princeton have really short questions about, in 50 words or fewer, tell us what you did with your past 2 summers. Most don't even ask that. So if you're even going to address your summer, it's either going to be you chose to write about it in your essay, or you chose to list it as one of your activities. But you can only list up to 10 activities. You don't need all 10. Many students just have 5 or 6. Some students have more, and they're making choices about what they cut out. So it's very possible it might not even fit in to the application at all. So I would say do what you want to do, particularly because no one activity is what makes a student pop. It's not like a college is going to look at your application and on the screen of the PDF and be like, oh my God, they did an internship in a bio lab. That's not really what's happening. It's really the entire vibe and the entire feel that they're getting from the application. So as I said, again, the activity is just a snapshot of what your interests are. And especially if you're interested, if you like camp and you like being a camp counselor, maybe because you like working with kids, well, that's also an important part of your story. So I think it's really important that students be allowed to do the things that organically interest them. I think when the students that I see at my school struggle in the application process are the ones where they and their parents have spent so much time trying to engineer having a strong application. So you end up with this student that does all these things and they're, quote, well-rounded, but when they have to write the essay or they have to go on a college interview and they're asked, so why do you love playing soccer? Or why did you find that internship interesting? There's nothing of great depth to really talk about, because the only response to that is, well, I did it for my college application. That's not really a very compelling answer. So I think really allowing students to do what interests them is key. No, I don't think over summer you should sleep every day till 2 p.m. and hang out with your friends and play video games and do nothing else. I do think it's a great opportunity to learn and do something different or pursue something you really enjoy. But I don't think there's any one particular thing that you need to do or that's going to enhance or detract from your college application.
Thanks, Ari. I love that. I was sitting at a table this past weekend celebrating my own child's graduation from high school, and both my husband and his brother talked about the experiences they had at camp as counselors, because that was their first job, and the sense of responsibility that they got from it. My brother-in-law got promoted to dishwasher. It was a really big deal, y'all. Those are really core memories for them, and they're formative experiences. And our job as parents and educators is to build an adult. And you can get a lot of experiences from lots of different places that will help in adult building, including being a dishwasher at camp. Another summer question. Summer's really the only time that we can visit colleges at all, but we hear that's not a great time to visit because students are not on campus. Is it okay to still visit in the summer? Is it a waste of time?
That's a great question. And certainly I get that perspective. And if you can visit when school is in session, certainly that's more ideal because you see the students. But hands down, visiting is better than not visiting. So if really, we all have lives, and especially if you're talking about traveling a distance to get to a college, whether it's by car or even getting on a plane, it's just often not convenient to do it during the school year. It's often just not even possible. So I would say still go visit. You can take a campus tour. You can go to an information session. And I think students will still get, just from their tour guide and the few other students around, they'll still get a general sense of the vibe and of the campus. And I'd say the campus too, because I think one of the things to keep in mind for those of you who are students, when you're choosing a college, you're doing two different things. You're choosing the next phase of your education, and that's really key. But you're also choosing, if you're specifically thinking about a 4-year college, you're also choosing a home for 4 years. And we all have different, what feels like home to each one of us is very different. That's trying to figure out what home feels like. That's a tactile experience. It's not one you can just research on the internet. So I think really sometimes, even if the students aren't going to be around, just seeing the campus and seeing the buildings and the few students who are there, I think students can still get a really strong sense of whether this is a place they want to call home in their community.
Thank you, Ari. Jed, you mentioned your niece who was very successful with scholarship opportunities.
Yeah.
Do you have any tips for how to find those kinds of generous colleges if a student has the numbers that might be compelling?
I mean, in terms of first, if you have a list, go on the websites and look up the scholarships they offer. Some of them are very transparent about the scholarships they offer, like UVA, here's GPA thresholds, here's, what's considered. There's a website I use, CapX is one of those that does have a merit aid section. And, but otherwise it's going to be, asking, querying, because they're often very, very clear. Here are the scholarships for those who have threshold or matrix scholarships, where other ones say, yeah, we'll consider testing as part of it. If they do give merit-based aid, because again, this is not for need-based aid, that's financially driven, that's your assets, your income. And this is about my performance was great in school, I have great grades, I have great scores, and you want me in here, they offer you money for that reason. So it's merit scholarships you're looking for.
It's a great question to ask those college reps that come to visit your school when they ask you if you have any questions and you don't. That's a question you always have. So of any school, so you could always ask it. And your friendly neighborhood counselor will also be a great resource if you're lucky enough to have someone like Mr. Worthman at the ready. Ari, a follow-up question about visits, college visits. Sure. Does that have an impact on the admissions process?
That's a really great question. So I'm going to broaden that question a little bit. I don't think it's so much does visiting. I think in this day and age, does what is often called demonstrating interest have an impact on the admission decision? And for some colleges, it can. Now, if you visiting is the greatest demonstration of interest. So you can check that off and be like, great, for this college, I've demonstrated interest. I would think about it more, though. I think even for colleges that don't track that and don't consider it in their admission process, I think it's much more, it's about your level of engagement, right? If you're applying to a college, you should engage with that college in some way. And engaging in visiting is one way. Registering for one of their virtual panels is another way. I want to be sure that people know that to demonstrate interest, that doesn't require spending lots of time or money to travel and get places. Ginger mentioned if you're at a high school that might have some college reps or maybe even many college reps coming through in the fall, showing up and signing in and meeting that college rep and asking questions is another really great way to demonstrate interest. So I would say, yes, some schools that can be a component of the application, usually not a deal breaker, but a component. Your job is not to convince them you're in love with them. You need to show them some love, though. So this is not a checklist of, did I go to the high school visit? Did I visit campus? And did I have an interview? I don't think you don't want to go crazy along those lines, but I think definitely for any school you're applying to, finding some way to engage them, particularly to learn more about them, and with the added effect of demonstrating interest, I think is wise.
Thanks, Ari. I think they're giving you the answers to the question, why do you want to go to our school? right? They might ask you that question on the application. They surely would ask you that question if you had an interview with a college representative or an alumni interviewer. And so they're giving you the answers. So take advantage of those opportunities to learn more about the school. A question, and this may be the last one we have time for, but it's an important one. What role can parents and guardians and student supporters play in this process? Where is their place in this journey?
Great question. I think parents and guardians can play a really important role in this process, but with boundaries. The thing I always say is, I regard the students as the captain of the team, or if we think about this as we're all in the car together, the students driving the car, and maybe you're in the passenger seat or in the back seat with them, but they are the ones driving it. What we really want to try to avoid is your student having to put you in the trunk. So let's try not to get too crazy. And so what can you do? I think the college process is a really great opportunity for students to learn more about themselves and have the experience of making a really important big life decision. Sometimes those decisions don't go the way we want, and sometimes we learn from that. I think parents and guardians can be really fantastic at being a sounding board. Ask your student questions, get them thinking about different things. I also would say focus, no matter where your student goes, there are so many great colleges out there with so many great opportunities. Focus more on what they're going to do in college and all the exciting things they can explore, and not on where they go. That is a big mistake I see families make. So really just get them to think about what are all the things they want to explore, what is exciting, get them excited about some of that stuff. Respect the fact too that college is not something they might want to talk about all the time. A complaint I hear from a lot of my students is every night, all my mom and dad want to talk about at dinner is college. And there are lots of other exciting things to the end of junior year and senior year, aside from talking about college. So have some boundaries and make sure you're not losing sight of the other really exciting things. And I would say lastly too, remember as parents and guardians that this really is your student's process. And I think sometimes we've become in this world a little bit like the college process has become this public discourse. Parents talk about it in the parking lot at school, or you run into someone in the grocery store and just talk about where my child is applying and what they wrote their college essay on. The analogy I always give as adults, I'm sure most of us have applied for jobs and not gotten jobs. No one stands in the middle of the grocery store being like, I applied for a job here, 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 and here, and I got this one, didn't get this one, and got a call back for this one, right? That's private information. That's private to us. So I would also be sure to respect your students' privacy, have a conversation with them about what type of privacy, if any, they want you to respect in the process. And finally, I would say, and this is something for students to know too, again, I was alluding to this, make sure to talk about other things than college. Don't default to that. I think that's a very common thing. Students, you might already be discovering parents, aunts, uncles, your next door neighbor, everyone's asking you, what are you doing for college? And you're like, gosh, why are they all trying to pry into my business and my life? They're just trying to be good, friendly people. They're like, what do you talk to someone who's 16, 17, or 18 about? They often don't even know. I have students and they talk about things like, what is that? So a common thing if you're an adult is to want to default to college. So I think students, you can also think a little bit about that too, about, hey, what are some stock answers you have for when you don't want to always talk about it? And I think parents and guardians, if you can be respectful of the fact that they're not always going to want to talk about it, and be respectful that at family gatherings and at parties and stuff, talking about your student's college process in front of everyone is probably not the best idea, and to really respect that for your student.
Ari, I love that. I had a rule for a lot of students, you can only talk about college on Tuesday, to try and kind of create space for every other part of life. And I do think there are a lot of well-intentioned adults who are asking students questions because they're looking for ideas.
Yep.
For themselves of what to be when they grow up. So students take heart when they're interrogating you. It might be that they're looking for tips. Jed, parting words.
Parting words. Well, when it comes to, I guess my little piece is the testing piece. Just do your research, do your homework. Don't be thoughtful about this one, and actually make a spreadsheet. In terms of the schools you're looking at, the score threshold, does it make sense? Do I send, not send? Do I prep a little more? Just do it, be thoughtful about it, and find out, can this thing be beneficial? And some of you will apply with scores, some of you will not, totally fine either way. But just do a little bit of research on the front end. That's my thought.
Stay calm and carry on. We are so excited for the adventures that the students who are watching tonight have ahead of them. This is an exciting time and an exciting journey. There are lots of paths to college. It doesn't always happen between 18 and 22 for everybody. It doesn't always happen in one fell swoop. And lots of different journeys have real value and meaning, and there are really great opportunities on the other side if this is something that you want to pursue. And you've got lots of people rooting for you. And every college admissions officer I know is always happy to answer questions, even if they're not really about their own school. So there are lots of ways to find supporters and advocates in this process, even if you aren't lucky enough to have Ari and Jed on a webinar every night. But we are really grateful for their time and energy and conversation this evening. I hope that you all learned a few things. I certainly did. And I'm so grateful to Ari and Jed for sharing their experience and their perspectives with us. As a reminder, you will get a copy of the recording of tonight's conversation, and we appreciate the opportunity to be along for the ride on your path to college. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.